Are you a businesswoman who is finding it challenging to get your ideas across and make a point? Welcome to Speakers Who Get Results with Elizabeth Bachman, a podcast dedicated to helping women get the visibility they want, whether making a speech or talking in a meeting. Every week, get valuable lessons from Elizabeth or learn from her roundtable conversations with experts and speakers on how to make a difference, not just a point. On to the show with your host, Elizabeth Bachman.
Hello and welcome to Speakers Who Get Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host, and this is the podcast where we interview experts from around the world on such topics as leadership, diversity, visibility, communication, and communication challenges. Before I get into the conversation with my very interesting guest today, I'd like to remind you that if you're curious how your presentation skills are helping you, you can take our free 4-minute quiz at speakforresultsquiz.com. That's www.speakforresultsquiz.com. And that's where you can see where you are strong and where perhaps a little support could get you the results you need and the recognition that you deserve. My guest today is Ukeme Aswakessien Jeter, who is a lawyer, an engineer. She's a city councilwoman in Upper Arlington, Ohio, and a wonderful story of how she came from growing up internationally. She's originally from Nigeria, going to school in America, having made her career in all sorts of interesting places, but most importantly, whenever there was an opportunity, she jumped. She went for each opportunity and has had a very interesting career and life. And she's still pretty young. So the official bio is Ukeme is a partner at the law firm of intellectual property at the Taft law firm in Columbus, Ohio. She focuses on negotiating and structuring intellectual property licenses, options, and related agreements. She enjoys solving the emerging and complex challenges that are encountered when bringing revolutionary products and services to market. And she specializes in driving innovation. Ukeme is an active member of her community, and she's proud to call Upper Arlington, Ohio, her community of choice. That's a suburb of Columbus, Ohio, the state capital. In 2021, she was elected to the Upper Arlington City Council, making history as the first person of color to be elected to the council in the city's 100-year-old history. Beyond her service to Upper Arlington, Ukeme is a tireless advocate for causes of access, equity, and inclusion. Ukeme serves on the board of directors for Ohio Legal Help, which is a nonprofit that leverages technology and innovation to improve justice and fairness for all Ohioans. You will hear in our conversation how they manage to get access to legal help on people's phones. She also serves in the United Way of Central Ohio's Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Council. Ukeme is the proud and doting mother of 2 young children. Together, they like to hike, bike, play an overly competitive game style of charades, and perform songs from the Hamilton soundtrack. Ukeme received a JD, that's a Doctor of Jurisprudence, at Case Western University School of Law, an MBA from the University of Massachusetts Lowell, and a BS in Mechanical Engineering from the University of Maine, where she was also a college athlete in track and field. Ukeme is an absolute delight to talk to. I know you'll enjoy our conversation. Now let's go on to the interview. Ukeme Aswakessien Jeter, I'm so happy to have you on Speakers Who Get Results.
Thank you for having me. Oh, yeah. Well, you were connected by a friend of ours and a mutual friend who raves about you. And now I know why she raves about you. I'm going to go a lot more into the various things the many things that you do and have done. But before we get started, who would be your dream interview? If you were to sit down with someone who's no longer with us, who would it be? What would you ask them? And who should be listening?
This one is always an easy one for me to answer, and people think I'm going to come up with this elaborate celebrity, but it's my grandfather. My grandfather, Simon Awakessien. I was 9 years old when he passed away, so didn't get to know him, right? There's pictures of me with him, but didn't really get to capture his essence. And what I've come to learn about the man, obviously through my father and my grandmother, who lived a great long life till she was 98, is just the incredible man he was for his time in understanding the value of education for the opportunities that it opens up to you, in empowering women to get an education and empowering them to pursue careers. So he had 3 daughters of his own, my aunts, and they're all educated. And this is odd for the time, especially being Nigerian. Nigerian women, you're almost the last person to go to school. It's like, let all your brothers go to school first, even if they're younger than you. And then if there's money and there's time and there's space, we'll send you to school. And that
Not just Nigerian. My grandmother had that too.
Wow. Look at that.
You're just a girl. Why should you bother?
Right. And so this was a man that it was apparent that that's what he believed and followed through on. He came here to the United States. He was in Washington, D.C. He went to Howard, and then he did a PhD at Case Western in Ohio. So, that's how my dad and my grandmother all came along. And so this was a man that understood your key to opportunities, education. And he transferred that to my dad. I have 4 sisters, and my dad imparted the same thing. And I, till this day, remember when I decided what I wanted to do for college. My grandmother was the only one that was pleased. Most other people, I decided I want to be an engineer, and most of the women were like, why? Is there any women that are mechanical engineers? And my grandmother and my dad and my mom were the only ones that said, go for it. So the people that would be listening would probably be my children. That would be the audience. Because sometimes I think you hear better when history tells you about the privileges that you have now. So I would want my children to be the audience.
Well, and lucky you, your children are still young enough that they listen to you. Just, wait till they turn into teenagers.
I don't know. I beg to differ. My 9-year-old is very precocious. So I'm just saying we just have to live with each other till she's off to college.
Great. Well, I'd be curious how you went from being a mechanical engineer to then turning around and being a lawyer and working on intellectual property. You worked in Geneva, you've worked in Arizona, you've worked also. Take us a little through how that progression happened, all those various pivots.
Yeah.
And what are the common threads?
The common thread, I think, is I've always been driven by possibilities. And I've been fortunate enough to have a support system that doesn't limit that says go for it. And, very young, when I was 6 years old, my dad's job, we were expats in the Middle East. So born in Nigeria, my formative years spent in the Middle East, right? And then college here, Wikipedia has a term for that, third culture individual, third culture kid, where you're cultural development is not the development in which your parents were born or raised, and not where you're from. So it imparted kind of just how I saw the world.
Well, you had possibilities. You became a mechanical engineer, and then you went from Maine to Arizona, but not the Arizona that everybody thinks of. It was Flagstaff, Arizona, which actually is mountainous and almost belongs more to our vision of Colorado than to our vision of Arizona. What did you think? What did you expect when you got there?
I didn't know much, right? But going back to this connecting theme, following possibilities. I knew that I was going to be on a project that related to wastewater treatment. I knew Arizona and Flagstaff used wastewater in their process. I probably should add some context or background here that I did. I worked for Georgia Pacific. I worked in pulp and paper, thinking about consumer products, paper consumer products, and there's water in that process.
So the paper, there's water in paper?
Yes, you have to create pulp. You need to melt wood chips with water and chemical, and a part of the process involves a lot of water. The development of paper before it's dried out takes a lot of water. And so the challenge here was we have a manufacturing facility in a city with limited water, right? Uh-huh. How do we do that? And I'm hearing Arizona, this part of Arizona, it snows. Well, I dealt with snow in Maine, but it's also very pretty. It's 7,000 feet above sea level. I've never lived in a mountain town before. And as a runner, the Olympic Training Center is in Flagstaff.
Uh-huh.
Yes. Okay. And so, again, new opportunities. The possibilities seem endless here. And so I packed up cross country and followed that lead. And while doing that work, I was exposed to how laws and regulation impact business decisions.
Uh-huh.
So as an engineer, we are tasked with solving a problem. I've always known from a long kid, I go a little beyond solving problems to imagining what could be, right? And so engineering at some point became limiting in that I had to solve a problem within this box. What laws and policy and reg does is say, how are people operating in this space? How do we want them to operate? And how do we build policies? How do we build laws? How do we write that so that we get that behavior? So it's imagining a whole different way of doing things. It's working in spaces that may not quite have regulation yet. And so I started to gain an interest in law. And I knew that engineering had a lifespan for me. I'd moved fast. I'd done a lot of things, and it was time to pivot.
How, before we leave engineering, how was it being a woman in engineering and a dark-skinned woman?
Yes. That's a great question, because I love to give a story here, which goes back again to, I think, the work that my grandfather imparted into my father, and then him supporting careers. When I was getting ready to leave for engineering school, as I told a lot of people, I think my major is going to be engineering. I'm not sure what type of engineering yet. I would get, there's not a lot of women engineers. And I uttered those words to my dad. At the time, I was very almost set on mechanical engineering, so I knew I wanted to do more in that space. I love German cars. So mechanical engineering and the art of engineering a car was fascinating to me. And so I'm talking to my dad and my mom at dinner, and I said, my only concern is there's not a lot of women in engineering. I had gotten my class roster and I knew I was going to be one of 3 females in my engineering class. And I was going to be the only Black female. So we're talking about these dynamics, especially with the backdrop that I went to an all-girls boarding school, right? So in an all-girls boarding school, I am told that I can be anything I want to be. I'm supported every way that I need to be. And I'm leaving a philosophy of bravery and courage and taking the steps to this. And you know what my dad did? I think a week later, he brought in like the female engineers that he worked with for dinner. And they sat to dinner with me and told me about their world, about engineering.
Wow.
Yes.
Your dad is awesome.
Yes. And so I remember that experience. I remember that formative before I left. And so I was able to champion through. I remember
you had mentors.
Project. I had mentors. I remember doing a senior project. Again, the only girl on the senior project team. And I'm talking, and I somehow would end up being the one taking the notes for the project. And my parents were going to be coming to my presentation for this project. And they were talking on the phone, asking how it's going. I said, it's going good, but I don't get to run the experiments. I get to write the notes. And I remember my mom saying, yeah, you're going to take turns. You're going to say, all right, it's my turn to run the experiment and your turn to write notes. And you're going to take turns just like you learned in preschool and kindergarten so that you all have a chance. And it was just this very simple idea, but somewhere along the way, as females, there's a social construct that we fall into that is not what our kindergarten or preschool, like the things where we were told to take turns and share, we lose that. I don't know why I never thought about that. So my mom's like, yeah, take turns. And that's what we
did. I have to meet both your parents. I think I do. Yeah. That's what. So how did, I'm beginning to see then, how did wastewater engineering turn into law?
Well, it was more of an open book. I wanted to go to law school again because I knew that law impacted a broader swath of what I wanted to do. I had thought in my head, perhaps environmental, because at the time that was the space that I knew. It's a buzzword now, but it was then too, where we really have to confront green in our society. Like we need waste reduction in all areas of our lives, right? And you can do this by adjusting human behavior, sure, but there's also policies that need to be in place. And
actually,
so
I think policies are what help rein in the greed.
They are.
Because, because they're always the people who are going to who are going to do what's best for them. Yeah.
Yes, it is. But we also know policies are long term. And so I was fascinated by that idea. And that's what I thought I was going to go to law school doing. But I kept an open mind because I don't have any lawyers in my family. Unlike what I felt like when I was going to engineering, that I was supported. I knew people in that field. Most of the people in my family, the law was like a fish out of water. I knew no one, had no networks. The reason I chose Case Western is because going back to my grandfather, my dad, when I'm shortlisting the law schools that I think I want, my dad's like, oh, Case Western, your dad did a PhD, my dad did a PhD at Case Western. And I remember going to go visit him. And I said, wow, okay, it's destiny. That's where I'm going.
Okay.
Right? So that's about the only connection I had. I'd never been to Ohio at that time. I'd never been to Cleveland. I went to visit the school, fell in love with the campus, and called my sister up. She packed up a truck and we moved cross country again.
Okay.
So got there and just decided I was going to use the first year to be open-minded. First semester of law school is kind of a very generic, you take these set courses. But by your second semester of the first year, you can take survey classes. These survey classes are intended to give you blitz into different areas. And so I took an intellectual property survey class. At the advice of a couple of people that knew I had an engineering background, they felt, listen, that's a very specialized skill set. There's not a lot of people that do both. And there's always a shortage in that area of law. It was in the middle of an economic downturn. So as much as I chase possibilities, I'm also practical and pragmatic about the job after. And so I took that course and fell in love with this protection of ideas, because that's really what intellectual property is, right? It's people's ideas towards innovation, towards brands, towards our arts, music, all those things. And it's how we protect it and how it's commercialized. And that balance of using for good, but at the same time, commercializing and making money. Mm-hmm. And so that would lead to this policy kind of tussle on intellectual property, which we know that the United Nations, the UN, is always working on. How do all our member states enjoy the liberties of health, intellectual property, all those things? And so I got connected to a fellowship program at WIPO, which is the World Intellectual Property Organization in Geneva, Switzerland. It's a branch of the UN that's what they do. They think about how are we leveraging intellectual property between member states. Because intellectual property is jurisdictional. Mm-hmm. When you get those rights, they are rights within the country that you get them. They don't cross international. But we've seen with the pandemic, all the innovation that has come out of the pandemic, whether it be the vaccines, the masks, any innovation that's come out of this, right? Because it's so jurisdictional, we need masks to protect the spread. Someone's got to have to give up their intellectual property license or cross-license or figure out that partnership so that another country can develop the masks or develop the vaccines. And how does that work? So I had an amazing experience understanding the complexity and the dynamics of that balance in Geneva.
Wow.
That's why I was hooked.
Yeah. Well, and Geneva's not bad. A pretty nice place to start it. Yes. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. I want to talk to you for hours and hours, but let's turn to politics. So here you are. You've got a job now as in an working intellectual property as a lawyer, and you decide to be a politician.
Yeah. How did
that happen? And I'm curious, did you ever hesitate?
Well, rarely do I hesitate at the time it's when I'm in the middle of it and I realize that I leaped very high or very far.
Yes.
I always say if I had taken more time to really think it through, maybe I wouldn't leap as high and fast as I do. But I think the common thread you see in all my life and opportunities that I leap. I just leap and I'll figure it out when I'm in it. Politics was no different. That I saw the possibilities again of how politics impacts in a very real way on the local level, the residents and civic engagement.
And tell us what you were campaigning for and why.
Yes, I was campaigning for a future city for my children.
As basically the City Council of Upper Arlington, Ohio, which is a suburb of Columbus, Ohio, which is the capital of the state of Ohio, for those who aren't familiar with American geography.
Thank you for that. Correct. Upper Arlington is an inner ring suburb, so it's just outside the city limits of the city of Columbus. It's a 103-year-old community. It was developed with some not so savory practices, redlining, which over the course of history determined the types of people that could live in Upper Arlington. And so Blacks and Jews were explicitly excluded from owning property in Upper Arlington. Obviously, all those laws were abolished in the 70s, and anybody could live where they live. But with systemic history like that, your city doesn't tend to catch up.
So you were living in Upper Arlington.
Mm-hmm.
What made you decide to run for city council?
Well, I had chosen this community to raise my children. My daughter was just about to start kindergarten when I picked this community. And when I got here, the history that the city had meant there weren't a lot of people that looked like my daughter in school. There weren't a lot of people that looked like my son. Even if my son was not yet school age, it would play out in her going to school, feeling different, not in a good way, going to the playground or walking the sidewalks, very aware of her difference in the community. And knowing that I had chosen this community to raise my children kind of lit that fire under me, and the understanding that we can implement policies that creates a welcoming community. You can do that with politics, is what inspired me to run.
You told me when we were talking the other day about your daughter and her hair.
Yes. So when I talk about that, her feeling different, she came home from school one day in kindergarten and asked whether she could straighten her hair for school the next day.
Mm-hmm.
And the only reason for that is because that's the community she was in, and she felt like to fit in, her hair had to be straight,
yes,
like the rest of the girls in her class. And so, of course, as a mom, it takes your breath a little bit, and you kind of reinforce you're beautiful and your hair is beautiful, and just because it's different doesn't mean anything. But then you realize that if she's seeing it all around, representation matters. And
yes.
So when you look at our leadership, when you look at the school administration, when you look at every leader around the city, and she doesn't see someone reflected back that looks like her mother, as a 5-year-old in a 5-year-old mind, it's like, I need to look like them so that I'm valued.
Yeah. So that I'm safe, so that I'm accepted.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So you decided to run and you won.
Yeah. Against crazy odds. I don't know how. I'd never taken a campaigning class or training session. I didn't have the skill set. I was convicted. I was completely purpose driven, but I learned along the way. I found that village. I found the support system that was willing to take me under their arms, campaign with me, show me the ropes. And I found in it a community that message resonated with. Mm-hmm. I found a community that was ready for that change.
Yeah.
Always felt it, but it took stepping out. Mm-hmm. And those votes affirming what I've always believed to be the community that I chose. It's still I'm still awe-stricken when I think about those odds.
That's marvelous. What could you say to younger women, people who are looking at you and saying, I could never be as awesome as Ukeme? What advice would you have to other women? Good and bad. Like mistakes not to make, maybe, as well.
You know, I say this often to my mentees. Don't be afraid of change. I've pivoted so many times in my life. As long as there's an opportunity there that you're pursuing, go for it. And when you see it to its end, pivot. It's completely okay. We get one shot at this thing called life. There's no dress rehearsals. Live it on your terms. Right? There's a pragmatic way to do it, but don't limit yourself. Don't limit yourself thinking that's never going to happen. No one will accept that in the future. You don't know that. You can only make the best decisions with the information you have before you.
I'm thinking I shouldn't have restricted that question to women. You're very involved in diversity, equity, and inclusion in general, and also in helping with an organization called Legal Help. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about the work that you're doing there?
Yeah. Ohio Legal Help is actually this very innovative platform. We deal with helping Ohio citizens understand their civil rights. So this has nothing to do with criminal law, the criminal justice system, but civil rights. Think things like landlord-tenant disputes, right? Family law. Where do I file this? My SNAP paperwork. These things that get everyday citizens caught up, especially when you're overwhelmed with everything else you have going on with work and things like that. We are in such an information-rich environment, yet at the same time, people don't know where to get the legal help and information they need. And so there's a big justice gap there. We notice that is happening. That affects mostly the low income, right, and people of color. And so this was actually a directive, an innovative directive from the Ohio Supreme Court that said, close the justice gap. We shouldn't be dealing with these landlord-tenant issues that blow up. What can we do? And so a group got together and said, if we could, and we know that most people have a phone these days, right? If we could give them a platform that they could go to with whatever question, legal question they have, civil legal questions they have, right from their phone. Fill out the form that they need to take to a legal aid society or to take to the court. It would immensely, right? And it's a trusted form of information. So it's not no knock on Google or Wikipedia, but it's specific to Ohio laws and a trusted source of information. This will drastically help. And so when I was called on for the opportunity, again, I love innovative spaces. I love thinking about reimagining that future. I jumped at the opportunity to. And it was such a lifesaver with COVID and people trying to understand all sorts of dynamic, moving information with that. We offered them a place to get that information. And so it's just an organization I'm just so honored to be part of and seeing real impact and real help on across Ohio, the state of Ohio.
Let me ask you one final question, which is, if we've got a listener here who's part of an establishment organization, shall we say, and wants to do something to expand their boundaries, moving into diversity and places to let in awesome people like you, where does one start? What would be one thing someone could do to learn from your experience?
I think you start right where you are. I know it sounds like an obvious answer, but start with the things that you already are involved with, right? If you pay closer attention to those things, there are inequities, there are access issues, there is not parity going on with how those services are delivered. So start with the places that you're involved in or with and look at it deeply, ask further questions.
Yeah. Awareness, I think, is so important to be aware of the things that you've taken for granted.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Ukeme, this has been I want to bring you on for about 4 more episodes to talk about all the things I want to ask you about. This has been awesome, wonderful. Thank you so very much. We will be posting information on how to reach you in law and also as the city council member, the first Black city council member in Upper Arlington. Thank you for gracing the show with your information and your presence.
Thank you for having me. It was an absolute pleasure.
So this has been Speakers Who Get Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host. And let me remind you that if you're curious how your presentation skills are doing, whether you're strong or not, you can take our free 4-minute quiz at speakforresultsquiz.com. That's www.speakforresultsquiz.com. And that's where you can see where you are strong and where perhaps a little bit of support could get you the results you need and the recognition that you deserve. If you enjoyed this podcast, please tell your friends, give us a good rating. It helps people find us. This has been Elizabeth Bachman. I'll see you on the next one.
We have just concluded another great episode of Speakers Who Get Results with your host, Elizabeth Bachman. If you got value from today's episode, please feel free to share us with your friends and colleagues. You may also visit elizabethbachman.com for additional resources. Be sure to tune in every week for new episodes, and thanks for tuning in.